Hello, and welcome to Spring Vegetable Gardening. My name is Tia Silvesi, and I'm a residential horticulture agent with the University of Florida IFAS Extension in Hillsborough County. And let's get started. So first thing with your vegetable garden is you want to choose a good site. Most part, vegetables like full sun. You want to have access to water because they're going to need regular irrigation. And you want it to be somewhere accessible, like not too far from your house, so that you can easily get to the garden often. Types of garden beds, there's many, and a lot of home gardeners choose to go with a raised bed. So raised beds are good because they're off the ground, they have good drainage, they're easy to maintain, and they're elevated, so less bending. Couple cons about the raised gardens is, you have to build them, so you're going to need to buy some materials or have somebody build them. A standard size is about 4 feet by 8 feet. And then you're also going to have to fill them with soil. So a lot of people go to landscape supply companies and buy some soil by the yard to fill the raised beds, because it is going to take, quite a lot of soil depending on the bed size. Now, the most traditional type is just your simple in-ground garden. So most people use these if they have a large garden area, because it's kind of the cheapest, pretty easy startup. Just till or fluff up the ground, add some compost or amendments. And it's also easy to run drip irrigation, since most of the crops here you just grow in rows. A couple cons, it's a large area and you might be walking in there, so compaction could be an issue, like you're going to be walking on the rows. And there's just a lot of area for making weed control a little bit more difficult, so you could consider mulching the areas that you're not sprouting seeds and germinating plants in. Now, if you live in an apartment or a townhome and you want to do a container garden, you can grow vegetables in containers as well. Here I have pictured the grow boxes, and I think these are ideal. There's a lot of different brands out there, but both of these have the watering reservoir at the bottom so that they continually get moist. They also have a large volume area because kind of bigger is better for growing vegetables. They need a lot of space, they need a lot of soil, they need a lot of water. These grow boxes are durable. Most of them are UV resistant and can take the full sun. And then if you can get the self-watering component on it, that's great. Otherwise, maybe put a little saucer or a container on there. And the cons are that they're expensive. Like one of these containers might cost $40 just for the container itself, not including the soil and the plants. And, they're small. You can really just grow like one tomato plant or maybe a couple kales or Swiss chards in there together. So you'll need quite a few of them if you want to have a larger garden. Grow bags is another option for people who want to grow in containers. And these are more lightweight. They're easy to move if you're planning on moving sometime soon, and they're lower cost. They don't have the water reservoir at the bottom, so they tend to dry out quickly. And so they're kind of better for smaller plants like lettuce or something that's more short-lived. Here we have some herbs like oregano and rosemary in there. So then you also have your vertical gardens. And so this is great for urban areas and even indoors. You can do it with lights. The pros is that you can grow a lot of food at one time. Like look at the 50 lettuce plants on this grow tower here. You can also stagger the planting. So one day, 1 week plant like 10 plants, the next week plant 10 plants, and then every week you'll have a continuous supply of lettuce or whatever you're growing. Some of the cons is that these grow towers are high maintenance. They're expensive. It might be $200 just for the pot and the setup. And a lot of them do require electricity to be recirculating the water in there. Also, they're not suitable for large plants. You can't really grow corn or large tomatoes in here. So stick with the smaller things like the leafy greens, lettuce, bok choy, kale, Swiss chard. Now, once you got your garden system and you're ready to go, the first thing you want to do is prepare your soil. And so you want to loosen, fluff, or till your garden. Here's a little video of how to do it. Whatever tool you use, can be a shovel or a pitchfork, but just fluff up that garden. This is a good time to add in your compost, your organic amendments, to get the soil ready. Break up the clumps, any rocks or roots, large things, remove them out of the garden. And if you're preparing your garden, you might want to consider getting a soil pH test. So the ideal range for vegetables is 5.5 to 7.0. At our Hillsborough County office, in most county extension offices, they do pH testing, but we do not do the nutrient testing. You send it to the Gainesville Soils Lab for that.
4 inches are pretty good plates.
So here is your soil. You probably have sand if you're growing in Central Florida, like pictured on the left, just light, fluffy, and loose, but not very heavy with the organic matter. And what you might wish you had for growing vegetables is more of a darker, loamy soil with more organic matter. And that's going to help keep the soil moist. It's going to help retain the nutrients and provide a more beneficial home for the good microbes to live in. So that's just going to take constant amendment. Every time you're starting a new crop, fluff it up, add some organic matter, and you'll be good to go. So next, we're going to talk about right plant, right place, and that's a Florida-friendly landscaping term, but it also applies to edible crops such as vegetables and fruit trees. So in thinking about your garden design, if you're in Florida or the USA, the Northern Hemisphere, we're always, the sun is going to be angled at the south. So the tallest plants you want to plant on the north, that way the sunlight gets there with the angle and it doesn't block them. And then you can choose to plant in rows or no rows. Like this garden here is laid out in the square foot garden design where the broccoli is planted on about 12-foot centers. So the rows or no rows, it depends on your garden design. This is like a raised bed kind of garden design here. You also want to think about crop rotation, not planting the same plant in the same place over and over. And biointensive gardening is also similar to square foot gardening. You want to put the plants close together. There's no rows for walkways here. So we're going to be reaching in from the side of the garden. So it doesn't matter how you want to do your garden, but it is important to plant the tallest plants on the north. So if you're going to put a trellis in, put that on the north side. Also, the right plant in the right time is extremely important for growing vegetables in Florida, because our season here is starting in like September, going all the way through the winter through May. Some people have summer gardens, but just the winter time is the ideal time for most vegetables in Florida. So you can get the exact timelines on what to plant when from the Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide. And you can find this IFAS publication online by Googling that, or scan the little QR code here at the bottom, and that will bring it up for you. So this is available in English or Spanish, and the planting date is going to depend on your local weather. So Central Florida, we kind of go with our last frost date being February 15th. So, before that, you can be starting seeds in greenhouses, keeping them protected. But once February 15th comes, we may get another frost, but probably not. So maybe that's a good time to go ahead and plant. You always have to observe your local weather, look at your forecast. see what's going on. But also consider extending the season. Like I mentioned, if you have a greenhouse or a protected area that you can grow in, you can start your seeds earlier, early in January, and get the plants ready and big to put out. Also, if you have a shade house for the summertime, a lot of plants come May, it gets hot and dry and they don't want to do well, but a little bit of extra shade and a little extra irrigation, to keep them cool, can help you extend the season. So here's one of the tables in that IFAS Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide that I just mentioned, and it will tell you the specific crop, the planting date, like what month is a good time to plant it, and then also the spacing of the plant, how deep to plant the seed, how easy it is to transplant, and the plant family, which will be important in the crop rotation, where you don't want to plant the same family plant over and over because of pest and disease problems. So here's another infographic that IFAS Gardening Solutions puts out every month. So edibles to plant in February is just one example. You can Google, infographics, or scan the QR code here to get the whole listing of what to plant in every month. But it kind of breaks it down for you by, what survives transplanting easily, what should you just direct sow here, what should you be more careful when you're transplanting. And they've been expanding this list to not include but just the beans and the cucumbers, but some different type of vegetables and even fruits, like pineapples on this list, the tomatillo, sugarcane. So February is really the go month in Florida to just get everything planted. Another tip is to use Florida varieties. So Seminole pumpkin in the center here, Everglades tomatoes, those tiny little penny-sized tomatoes, rattlesnake pole bean. These are all things that will do good in Florida. They're more pest and disease resistant, and they can also take the summer heat. So these things you can plant in the summertime when it's too hot for some of those European varieties to grow. A lot of people ask me where to get seeds, and there's not like one place that I go. There's a ton of online seed suppliers, and all of them are very good. If you're growing in Florida, you might look for something more like Texas or Georgia, more than like Maine or Washington as a seed supplier. The seeds that they have at the local plant nurseries and big box stores, those are all good. They freshen them up every year and throw away the expired ones. Local seed swaps or Facebook groups. You'll see these little seed swap saving boxes, sometimes at churches or people's yards, and just saving your own seeds, like some of the heirloom varieties, like the Seminole pumpkin. You grow a pumpkin, you save it, you eat it, save the seeds, give them to your friends, and plant it again next year. But when you are looking at the seed catalogs, this picture on the right, this shows two different types of broccoli here. And what you want to look for is it open pollinated or heirloom, or do you want a hybrid? And that can be personal preference. They're both good. It just depends. Maybe a hybrid might have some more improved like disease resistance, or maybe it's a earlier maturing variety. So for example, this broccoli here on the left, this matures in 85 days, whereas the broccoli on the right is only 75 days. And, read the comments about it and see which one is in stock and which one you think will grow for your area. So the disease resistance is something I always look at, as well as the estimated days to maturity. If you're going to save seeds, you might want to look for heirloom or open pollinated. Usually broccoli, we don't save seeds, so I wouldn't care so much there. Now, the seeds you want to direct sow in your garden, think like the big seeds and then the root crops. So, we have green beans we're planting here right into the ground. Look how big those seeds are. This is also the great vegetable to plant with kids because they're just so easy to handle and get in there. Root crops like carrots, beets, radishes, turnips, those all are very good, direct sow because the seeds are small and then you don't want to get the taproot bent up. That might cause a little crook in your carrots. And then other large seeds like the squashes, pumpkins, cucumbers, you can just pop those right into the earth, at the appropriate time. The seeds we want to start in flats. Those are merely the small seeds that are slower to germinate. So say tomato, it takes a couple weeks to germinate, maybe 1 week, and then you want to grow it for 4 to 6 weeks in the flats, before it's ready to transplant. Peppers, eggplant, cabbage, broccoli, Swiss chard, all these types of things are good to plant in the cell flats. And then you can choose like the biggest and healthiest plants out of there to transplant into your garden. You can also plant in either larger pots or small pots, large cell flats or small pots, those things like the cucumbers, squashes, like this cucumber plant here in the bottom picture. I planted a couple of those, only that one germinated, but that's beautiful. And then I'll put that into the ground. It will be ready to go. So I'll get a little jump start on my garden by starting them in the flats, in the small pots, as opposed to direct sowing, because your garden space, if you're just a normal homeowner, is probably pretty valuable and you don't have a big, huge farm that, you have unlimited space. So the more you can get going and then get the spacing exactly correct, the better. So after planting your seeds, you want to use a gentle shower spray to water them in. That way you're not washing out the seeds, go over it a couple times, wait a couple seconds, go over it again. And that way you'll make sure the potting soil is thoroughly moist. And then after that, you want to let it kind of dry out after the initial watering, let it dry out and then keep an eye on it and then maybe spritz it, whatever as needed. We don't want to overwater the seeds because that can cause kind of a damping off or fungal problems. So just allow the soil to dry out a little bit between watering, but make sure they don't completely dry out because then your seeds might wilt and die. So here's a little spritzer. If you just have a small seed flat and you're trying to keep them moist, you can just put some water on using a spritzer. And then here's kind of your schedule, your seed starting schedule for the springtime. And here's some of our seedlings that are like ready to go.
Here are the vegetable seeds we have started: lettuce, collards, cauliflower, spinach never looks that great. We got broccoli and Swiss chard. So these are all ready to go into the garden and worth planting starting today.
So come January, get your seeds started indoors in the greenhouse, like the tomato, peppers, broccoli, cabbage, kale, all the ones I talked about in the cell flats. February, go ahead and start your garden, get some things in the ground, like go ahead and do your carrots or your radishes, your turnips in the ground, also your green beans and your cucumbers, after the danger of first frost for those. Now, March is like get game on. If you have anything planted in the garden, if you already planted some green beans, plant another crop of them. And that way we can keep it going for getting a continual harvest all the way up to summertime. Also bump up any plants into larger plants, take out any runts, give them away to your friends and transplant them into the garden. So when you're starting your seeds, you might have, 2 pop up per hole. A lot of plants, we really just want 1 per hole, like 1 tomato plant, 1 cabbage plant. But if you have some lettuce, it's okay to have multiple seeds of like lettuce, Swiss chard, spinach, arugula, mostly the leafy green things, because you can just cut them and they come again. Flowers and herbs aren't that picky either. But the technique for if you want to thin them out, say you have 2 plants that grew out of 1 cell and then you have another cell that's empty, you can use a pencil or it's like a tool called a dibbler. And you just pry out the little extra plant, with the tool, and then you put it in your new fresh soil and maybe poke a little hole and then use that pencil to, push that plant root down, pack it in and then give it a nice little shower after that. So growing your own seedlings is definitely something you want to get good at. It's kind of an art, like baking a cake. You have to do things just right at the right time, put the seed in the right way. Once your seedlings have the first set of true leaves, like you can see on this little tomato plant here, the initial leaves are called the cotyledons. You can see them, the rounded ones here on these cabbages. And then once it gets the first set of true leaves, that's when you can bump it up to a larger pot or put a little extra soil in, give it a little extra love, and then get it out to the garden sooner or later. So here is the cucumber again on the left, ready to go into the garden. And on the right-hand side, we have some broccoli and we have some Swiss chard. And they are all ready to plant in this freshly prepared garden bed here. So see how these actually have 4 true leaves on this front broccoli. So, you want to get it as big as you can so you have a healthy plant start to get into the ground. Now, if you are a beginner gardener, you might want to just forget about those last 5 slides and just buy transplants. You can buy these at your local nursery or big box stores or, the flea market or wherever you can get them. The thing about transplants is they're instantly ready to go. Like, the pepper they have pictured here, that's probably a 2-month-old pepper. So instantly you're like ahead of the game. The plants are ready to go and it's easy to get them. They'll have beautiful roots on them, ready to plant in the ground. The con is mainly that they are expensive. You might be paying $5 to $10 per plant. So if you have a large garden, that might not be financially practical. And the other thing is the variety selection is limited. Like they're not going to have the Florida varieties like Everglades tomato or Seminole pumpkin. You can probably find like beefsteak tomatoes and cherry tomatoes, peppers, all that type of stuff. But they won't have the selection that you can grow from seeds. So once you get them in the ground, wait a little bit for them to get established, and then it's time to fertilize. So you can fertilize around kind of like the drip line of the plants all in that area and mix it into the soil a little bit or cover it up, and that will reduce the nitrogen losses. Also, when your plants begin to flower or fruit, that is another good time to fertilize. So the fertilizer requirements depend on the crop, and longer lived crops are going to require more fertilizer. For example, tomato, they can live for 60 to 100 days. So you might fertilize them first when you bump them up into a bigger pot. And then once they start fruiting, once they start flowering, and, if they continue to live, every 30 days after that, give them a little extra food. Whereas something like lettuce only grows for 30 days. So, maybe at day 14, you give it a little fertilizer and that's good enough because it's just a leafy green. The things that are making flowers and fruit are going to need more fertilizer. And you might even need to switch from, less nitrogen to more phosphorus and potassium, to help with the flowering and the fruiting. Now, it doesn't matter what you use. The fertilizer can be inorganic, like the Miracle-Gro product pictured on the left, or it can be an organic fertilizer, like the Dr. Earth pictured on the right. But you do want to find something that is labeled for vegetables, because vegetables have specific needs. They usually need more micronutrient than just your ornamental flowers or turf grass or something. So try to find something labeled for vegetables, unless you kind of make your own with your own organic amendments, that will have a good amount of macro and micronutrients. And so a lot of counties have a fertilizer ordinance, so make sure you follow the ordinance with all your lawn and landscape crops. But the vegetables are generally exempt from the ordinances, because we want you to be able to grow food and nourish your family. The thing about the ordinances is we still want to follow their general rules. You know, that's just common sense. Like, don't fertilize right before we're going to get a very heavy rain, because the rain can wash out the nutrients. And you know, so follow the label instructions on the fertilizer bag, like how much you should be applying on there. And then look at it per different crop requirements, because every crop will be different. Irrigation now goes right hand in hand with fertilizer, because we want to fertilize, we want to irrigate, but not too much, not too little. We want both of those to be just right. So the most efficient way to irrigate is either hand watering or micro irrigation. So pictured here on the left is just a drip tape. You can see the little hole, like emitter there, with the water drips out. And that's great for row crops or raised beds where you have a long straight area. Micro sprays pictured here in the middle on the green beans. Those are also good, especially if you have like container gardens or kind of irregular shaped gardens or small gardens. And the bubblers, these also work good. These put out a lot of water, like something like that would be good for a tomato plant, where they don't really like to get their leaves wet because of the fungal diseases. So timing is important with the irrigation. When you have seedlings and young plants, you're going to be watering maybe every day or little spritz twice a day. As they grow bigger, then you can water less often, but more water. So you want to, you know, deeper irrigation to get the root zone wet. That's where we want the water, in the root zone. We don't want it to go beyond the root zone. So don't water it for hours and hours. And remember, the irrigation is to supplement the rainfall. So if we get a good rainfall, you know, have a rain gauge out or whatever way you can track it, then you might not need to irrigate. On general, like vegetables need about 1 inch of water per week. So if you see that we got 1 inch in your rain gauge, they might be good, but just keep an eye on them, you know, see if they're drying out. And, you know, of course, you can hand water your plants when needed. If there's something that you're starting some seeds over here, you might need to hand water those, whereas your irrigation system can take care of the more established plants. So there's a lot of factors there. Mulch can also help. You know, mulch protects the soil, it builds the soil, preventing soil moisture loss so that water goes longer. It also is adding organic matter to build soil health as it breaks down. It's a protective layer that prevents the weed growth. It also helps, you know, lessen compaction from you walking, like in the rows here. And when you have young plants or seedlings, you can use a thin layer of mulch. But once you have your garden is well established, you know, just like your landscape beds, then you can do like 2 to 3 inches of mulch. You can see in this garden here, this is like a summer garden with okra here and some black-eyed peas. And, you know, the mulch is pretty thick all in between here to cover all that empty space on the rows. And so when you mulch your vegetables, you want to use some light materials, you know, like straw or pine straw or leaves. You want to avoid putting a heavy amounts of wood chip mulch because those can rob some nitrogen from the soil as the microbes are trying to break them down. And then, this is easier just when these plants are done, just rake all the mulch to the end in a little pile and you can till and fluff your garden and then, put it back on or compost it. So I'm going to go over some easy to grow vegetables now. And if you're a beginner, green beans is like the go-to, probably the easiest vegetable. You just plant the seeds, direct sow them, in a row. You could make multiple rows next to each other. There is the bush or the pole type. So the bush, you don't need to trellis it, but the pole beans, they can get 6 feet tall. They like to have a trellis and then you'll be able to pick the beans. They're pretty short crops. So 55 to 70 days within 2 months, you can have a nice, beautiful handful of green beans like this. They are legumes, so they are nitrogen fixers. They don't need a lot of fertilizer because they make their own fertilizer, and they don't have a lot of pest or disease problems. Sometimes you'll see some leaf miners, on the leaf, but very few things attack the actual green bean that you're going to be harvesting to eat. Once you get to the harvest period, then they will continually produce beans for 2 to 3 weeks. So you can go pick a couple every day or pick one, a pound a week for a couple weeks, and you'll have like 2 or 3 harvests. So in our IFAS gardening guide, there's some recommended varieties like the Provider that's in the photo right here. Also Contender is another good form of bush bean. Collards and Kale are like my second go-to easiest vegetable because you can buy these as transplants or start them from seed relatively easy, and they just live for a long time, maybe up to 1 year, and then you can continuously harvest them. So you could have like a kale leaf for dinner every day for 6 months. When you harvest, you just want to cut from the lower leaves, and then it will keep growing from the top. You always want to leave a couple leaves on the top for the plant to get the sunlight and photosynthesize and help make the food for the plant. So pictured here on the left is the Georgia collards. That's a recommended variety on our drip irrigation. You can see there. And then on the right is the VARIETIES, dwarf blue kale. And there's also, so that's the type of curly kale. There's also the dinosaur or Lasianano kale and the red Russian kale, which is kind of like purple and a little frilly. And so these are just really easy to grow. Sometimes you'll find a little caterpillar in there or something, but really easy, really healthy. One of the ones you should definitely grow at home. And then tomatoes, like everybody wants to grow tomatoes, and they're just so delicious, like a fresh picked vine ripened tomato out of your own yard. There's a lot to tomatoes. There's like more than 10,000 varieties of tomatoes grown around the world. But something you want to look for is what size fruit do you want? A lot of people grow the cherry tomatoes because they're just more sure that you're going to get a harvest. The larger tomatoes, they make less fruits. So you get, less fruit with the big ones, more fruit with the little ones. You can grow a little bit of each. And then you need to pay attention to the growth habit. So is it going to be a determinate variety, which is kind of like a more bushy type, or an indeterminate, and you'll hear the term like tomato vine, because it will just grow and keep growing and growing and putting out flowers and fruit and keep going. And those can live for a longer time. So, depending on the variety, it could be 60 to 100 days for the harvest. Cucumbers is another just good one for beginner people to grow. You can notice I have some plants of the baby plant, and then the leaves. I don't get any pictures of the fruit. Sometimes they are a little tricky to get them the fruit before the caterpillars eat them. But cucumbers are generally quick growing 50 to 70 days to harvest. There's different types like pickling cucumbers or slicing cucumbers. Some IFAS recommended varieties are the straight 8 and the Boston pickling. And now remember, you're going to need caterpillar control. If you're going to grow the cucumber, once they start getting, these baby leaves, go ahead and open it up with your thumbs, like unroll it and look for the caterpillars inside there. They almost always get caterpillars. So you just know if you're going to grow cucumbers, you're going to have a caterpillar problem. If you can unroll it and then squish it with your hand right there, check them every day, or you can spray them with a type of pesticide. We always use the least toxic ones first, like the organic ones, BT, which is short for Bacillus thuringiensis, spinosad, and then rotate the pesticides too. Don't spray with the same thing all the time. Spray this one this week and then a different one next week, and that will make sure the pests don't build up tolerance to it. Another key thing, you're having a caterpillar problem is you'll see the little green balls of the caterpillar frass or poop. So just keep an eye out for those, like scout your plants every day if you're growing cucumber, squashes, pumpkins, because this problem, exists with all of them. So caterpillars are one of the main pest problems with vegetables. You'll find them eating on your leafy greens. Like here's this bok choy plant, and there is the little frass, the caterpillar poop I was talking about. Also in the ears of corn or in the baby corn leaves. Caterpillars love tomatoes. Pictured here in the center is this tomato hornworm. And even though it's on a jalapeno pepper plant, cucumbers I mentioned and squash, they come on. So, you can kill the caterpillar, but especially with the tomato hornworm, once you learn that it turns into this beautiful sphinx moth, then maybe you'll just leave some for the moths to eat, and you'll grow some more tomatoes, or you can kill them all. That's up to you, so part of it is planting a little for nature. Maybe when you plant your seeds, the bunny rabbit eats a couple, so just plant a little extra, or maybe you need to put in a little fence or something to protect them. But that's part of building an ecological garden. So here's the squash vine borer caterpillar, the pickle worm, inside of these fruits here. It can get inside of the stems. You can see little holes. And so these, if you can find them, you can hand squish them. Otherwise, use the sprays that we mentioned. And, if your plant is just totally infested with these, maybe just rip it up and burn it or throw it out in the yard waste or something. So, that kind of brings me to some beneficial insects other than sprays. We want to create that ecological vegetable garden and bring in our friends like lace bugs, ladybugs. Those are really good for aphid problems. So aphids usually aren't even needing a spray or anything, because the biological, the beneficial insects will help control them. Parasitic wasps is something else that helps with caterpillars. And then we have the bees and other pollinators, because like this eggplant pictured here on the left, that needs pollination. So the little bumblebee is on the eggplant flower, and then it flies to the next flower. And that's how we get our vegetables cross-pollinated. And this is especially important for squashes, cucumbers, and melons, anything that's like fruiting and flowering. And so in order to attract more of these beneficial insects, what you can do is plant flowers. So a lot of people plant kind of like an insectary plants or flowers around the perimeter of their garden or other places in their yard. And here's some of the easy ones, I found to grow in Central Florida. In the top left, we have the tick seed. Zinnias are real easy from seed. The blanket flower that goes good in hot and dry. Calendula. red salvia on the top right, especially if you have a shady spot, that does great there. And phlox is another easy one to grow from seed. And that about wraps it up. So thank you so much for joining me for this vegetable gardening class today. And I invite you to take our survey. We'd really love to hear your feedback on the class, and, something important for our institution. So you can scan the QR code with your smartphone and take the survey that way. And then if you have any plant questions at all, please email us. We have a help desk. You can call, or you can take pictures and email them to us at hillsmg@mail.ufl.edu. And then follow us on social media too. We have a Hillsborough County Extension Facebook page. You can follow my blogs. Just Google Tia Solvesi UF blogs, and also visit our Master Gardener Volunteer Program website for Hillsborough County and learn how you can get involved in helping us answer plant questions and teach classes to the public. So thank you and goodbye.